I gotta hand it to the team. I really love their taste in music. Thanks everybody for joining us again this afternoon, and you're joining us on the last installment of Truelogic DX for 2021. And the last 12 sessions, and even just this year alone, it's been a year full of a lot of interesting conversations, a lot of aha moments, like even for me. And I hope it has been the same for you. In the past 11 sessions, we talked about a lot of topics, right? We talked about pivoting to digital transformation, social media strategy, influencer marketing, omni-channel, entrepreneurship, partnerships, and a whole lot more other topics. And just when you think you'd run out of things to talk about, I think there's always more to the digital conversation. And what I'd love to see is actually move some of those earlier conversations we had in the beginning to continue those conversations, even ideally with some of the guests we've already previously had in the series, if they'll have us, if they'll join again. And to bring more voices into the conversation, because there are still a lot of topics to cover. Like, take, for example, we haven't really had a deep dive conversation in terms of content. We haven't had a deep dive conversation in terms of data, in terms of customer behaviors, about branding strategy, about apps and where it falls in your entire strategy, e-commerce, right? And today's session is a topic we've not covered yet, and that's why we sort of decided to name today's session "You Are Not the Customer." And it's about championing user experiences. I couldn't have asked to close the DX sessions with a better guest. She's been a great resource for Truelogic like over the years. And probably the only person, I don't think she knows this, but she's the only person I hate speaking after because I look so low energy right after she talks. She's also one of the country's foremost experts on UXUI. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to DENISE HAAK. Welcome, Denise.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Bern. Super excited.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad you said yes. I don't feel I did your background, your resume justice, no, on that brief intro. Can you give people like a quick overview of your background, like an elevator CV, as it were?
Oh, okay. Sure. I am the founder and CEO of Qairos, which used to be called Quiddity. We were recently acquired, hence the name change. I've been practicing UX and CX for about 6 years now. But even before that, I was dabbling in it, especially with
Mhm.
design, meeting, computer science, which is my degree from LaSalle. So yeah, that's pretty much my elevator resume.
Yeah. So I actually have a question, Denise. And I don't think you and I ever managed to talk about this like in the personal time that we've had together. So a big question for me has always been like, why UX UI as a long-term career, right? Like why not something more mass market, more mainstream? Why did you decide that this is the battle you wanted to pick?
Because somebody has to do it.
That's true. That's true.
Really
So yeah, for me,
fell in love
yeah.
with it because UX is one of those industries where you don't make the decisions in a boardroom.
Mhm.
It's not you and your clients or your partners and your consultants. You have to go out and check with customers and users. And ultimately, they tell you if you're heading in the right direction or not. And I love that. I love that it's
Mhm.
removing us from the equation, which is because we're not the customer. Yeah.
Right. One of the things that I always thought would be challenging for like take for example for us, we're in digital marketing, and finding talent for that, like it's already pretty mainstream, but finding talent for that is extremely hard, right? In other countries, like in the US, they have the Stanford University or they have the behavioral design lab. No, they used to call it the persuasive technology lab, I think. And that's where Tristan Harris came from. Like, he was the head of ethical design at Google. That's where the Instagram founders were from. But there's nothing similar to that here. So for you, how do you even begin to build a team? Like, how do you even begin to find the right people, develop the talent to be able to offer those services here?
I love this question because every job has soft skills and hard skills. So
Mhm.
obviously the hard skills are they have to have a penchant for design, they have to have good sense of aesthetic, balance, contrast, alignment, etc. So those are the hard
Right.
skills. that would be required in any design profession. But the soft skill, which would be at the heart of what we do, is empathy. So if you find somebody that has natural or intuitive empathy for other people, they have a good chance to be a great UX professional because,
Wow.
yeah, because you have to be able to relate to your customers in a way where your personal agenda goes out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're seeing the same things over and over again, you don't say, yeah, 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 we heard that already. You know, you have to be very
Right.
empathic, sometimes to the fault of sacrificing your own needs on behalf
Right.
of them.
Or your own priorities, right? So what I wanted to begin the conversation with was demystifying like what UX UI is. And then of course on the flip side, right, like what it is not. And I want you to help us figure it out. So when you're talking about, the design of a website, is that UX UI? When you're building an app, is that UX UI? So is design necessarily UX UI?
That's an awesome question. So I'll take the second part of the question first.
Mm-hmm.
Design, when you really think about it, is very encompassing and universal. The other week, I think I just Googled different kinds of design professions and I created like a 60 item checklist because you have people like us, UX designers, but then you have graphic designers and furniture designers and
Right.
lighting designers, jewelry designers, for example. Even an architect is a designer. So you
Right.
really run the gamut. People who design boats. And I think the distinction we have to remind everybody is that there's a difference between design
Mm-hmm.
and artistry. Artistry
Right.
is really a practice in creativity and self-expression and communicating some kind of emotion from the artist. And design is actually trying to create emotion, whether positive or neutral, for the users. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you design a website, it could be considered user experience once it's being used. So if the website is somewhere in the back of somebody's cloud and it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been launched yet and nobody's actually tried to click any buttons or they've never seen it, it hasn't entered the realm of user experience. The minute you have people who actually need to interact with this thing and actually need to use it to complete tasks, then it becomes user experience.
That's a great line in the sand, though, because my follow-up question was going to be they're usually bundled together, but the UI actually really facilitates the UX, right? And people just really sort of put the two phrases together. Where would you separate UX and UI?
So UX is how a thing behaves and works, how you
Mm-hmm.
carry a customer from one part of the journey to another. And
Mm-hmm.
UI is all of the things they interact with. That's why it's called user interface design. And I think a good metaphor for people who need to understand the relationship between UX and UI, it's kind of like a doctor and a nurse,
Mm-hmm.
where the doctor might be able to diagnose the problems and the nurse helps carry out those things in a way that has more bedside manner, possibly. Or more specifically, like an architect and an
Mm-hmm.
interior designer. So the UX designer is the architect that makes sure everything is in the right place, that traffic flow, lighting, etc., is perfect. And the interior designer has to come in and make sure that that aesthetic is balancing out everything that the architect created. Because
Right.
if it's ugly, no matter how well it's UX, nobody's gonna want to use it. Yeah, it's a big part of a lot also.
Right.
Yeah.
The the other thing to me is I think there's a perception in the general population that a UX UI designer is sort of like a level up, a step up of a designer, right? But I think the best way to understand it is let's say we were looking at two professionals. Like let's say we were watching and we were looking over their shoulder. What would you see if somebody was doing just designing, like run of the mill designs, and somebody was actually performing UX and UI? What would they be doing different?
One is designing in a room, and the other one keeps going out to check with people if the designs are working.
Mhm. Right, right. See, that's great, right? And a lot of people don't really know that that's happening, right? Because I think the impact of UX UI is it's not clunky, right? It tends to simplify. Like it's like electricity; it's invisible, right?
Yes, yes.
And so I think that's why a lot of people don't realize, no, it's a lot of work. We have to watch how your customers interact with the designs or with the interfaces and so on and so forth. So if I ask, is there an answer to what is good design and what is good UI? Like, is there a difference between what is good design versus what is good UI?
That is the, that is such what we do every day. That is the question
Mm-hmm.
we ask every day, because what would be good for one set of users would not be for another. And something that's very interesting that I find is you could have competitors, for example,
Mm-hmm.
let's just say soft drinks. So you have Coca-Cola and Pepsi.
Mm-hmm.
And in the marketing world, they're competitor brands and they're
Right.
always fighting for share of mind and share of wallet of these users. But when it comes now to the experience they have with the digital products of these different companies, they might not be competing with each other. So you might have that because Coca-Cola has some music under their branding, that their competition is somebody like Spotify, right? And then you have Pepsi that has more sports under their branding, so their competition could be something like ESPN. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I find fascinating about good design measurement is you might want to remove your marketing hat sometimes because it's really not based on who your competitors in the
In the
marketing.
market really are right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I go through this a lot. Like when we do audits for clients and we tell them these are the people you will be competing with, and they go like, no, 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 you didn't do your research. These are so not our competitors. But I go, but they're the ones ranking for your product. So it doesn't matter who you think you're competing with. These are the guys that are occupying the space you want, right? So that's a good analogy. Like your competitor is not necessarily your real life one is to one analog. let's I'll shift the conversation over to needs, and I'll actually have questions about competitors like later on, right? But let's talk about needs. There are many people that talk about being particular with UX UI, and most of the time though it winds up being an opinion game, and in most cases it's the boss's opinion that sort of outweighs everybody else. No, so in short, it's mostly an opinion.
It's pretty much for any industry, not just UX.
Right. Well, in a situation like that, uh, normally when you ask people bluntly, like because I encounter this like when I talk to clients and decision makers, but then when I ask them, okay, so what's your line item budget for investing in UX UI, right? And bottom line is in it rarely gets invested in. It's talked about all the time, but it's rarely ever invested in. So I'll break this question apart, like Voldemort's soul into a few pieces. So first question is, when should a business suspect that they need to invest in UX UI?
When you start getting irate customers. So if you have all of these people coming to your website, but the bounce rate is really high,
Mm-hmm.
or you notice they're perusing your website, but they're not actually transacting with you, they're not
Mm-hmm.
converting, they're not checking out. If you notice that they're actually getting the service from what I again call a pseudo competitor. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, they're not going to your app, they're going to Grab. You got to
Right.
ask already. Maybe that it's UX that's the problem, because another person or another app could easily deliver a better experience. And in that world, faster, funner, and fitter
Right.
is what wins. And it doesn't matter how strong you are in the brand game. It's really about faster, fitter, funner.
Right. Can it ever be too early for a brand to pull the trigger on UX UI?
Absolutely not. In fact, the earlier you do it, the better, because
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to development and engineering, coding products is a very tedious and long process. And if you start the UX process early, the likelihood that you'll have to fix stuff during the development phase is much, much less. You
Right.
actually test and iterate way before it starts getting coded. And so there's less errors, less bugs, less repetition, less corrections. And more importantly, you don't wonder if when you deploy this product, if people are actually going to be able to use it or if they're going
Mm-hmm.
to like it. You already did. You kind of tested it before you even built it. Yeah.
Let's take the opposite of that question. On the flip side, can it ever be too late to invest in UX UI?
Also, no. Also, no. I guess, it's kind of like asking the question, is it ever too late to fall in love? If you haven't, you know, unfortunately, if you're in your twilight years, no, and your partner has had to, leave this earth, you shouldn't give up on love. I mean, it's never too
Right.
late to find that wonderful relationship, and that's what UX is. It helps build wonderful relationships between the.
All right. No, that's a That is such a great way to put it. Like I personally I never like seen it that way. So take, jumping off from that point of the conversation, what brands do you think have done this? Like what brands have put in the investment to build great relationships with their customers?
So I mentioned Grab already, and one of the things I love about Grab is it's very, very hard to end up as a super app. In fact, generally speaking, UX practitioners try to advise against it. When we say a super app, an app that can do everything, which is
Right,
essentially Grab and what's the Indonesian one? Gojek, right? What they
right.
do. Um, However, if you get it right, it becomes very, very powerful in the hands of your customers because it's one thing that can do everything. So finding that balance where it doesn't feel like you're overwhelming your customers or feature bloating your app or website unnecessarily, but still giving them the convenience and flexibility that they actually want is for me, that's the mecca of good UX.
Hmm. Right.
Grab and Gojek and Amazon, I think, are doing that very, very well. Um, and then there are the companies that are very singular focused. I have one thing I'm offering, and because there's only one thing I'm offering, it almost designs itself. It's very seamless, painless. So Spotify, for example, is something that doesn't take a lot of cognitive load to figure out how to
Hmm.
use. And that's because they have a singular focus. You're going to listen to music here. That's all that happens here.
Right.
Other media. We're not throwing in other stuff that you could do. We're not even throwing in you could record music on Spotify, which I'm sure they easily could have if they
Right.
wanted to, but they were very singular in focus. So
Right.
never similar. We're not going to muddle this with other things. You're just going to watch stuff.
Hmm.
Locally, I think the ones that do that well are. So there is this. I don't know if people on the in the audience know about them. They're called Deco.ph.
Hmm.
TEO, and they're basically a aggregator to get repairmen and servicing for your home appliances or office.
Wow.
And that's all they do. And when they take you through the journey, it feels very seamless. They don't overwhelm you with everything at once. They disclose things progressively. They show a progress bar of where you are, and they don't require you to answer questions that they understand might be scary or just frustrating. So, for
Hmm.
example, if you're asking for your air conditioning to be repaired, they offer you the option to send photos, but it's not a mandatory requirement. You don't have to,
Hmm.
and
Right.
that clear understanding of where a user might drop off because, man, this is too much hassle, or they're getting intimidated, is where UX becomes a wonderful,
Right.
yeah.
Because I think they're the examples of brands that make customers jump through their hoops, essentially creating friction in an experience, right? I think they're thinking the best example and the simplest example I think are websites where an inquiry has a field has a form has 7 fields, right? Like why? And then when you ask, the answer from the business is, well, because we want to make sure they're qualified. Okay, then the form really isn't serving your audience. The form, you put that form there to serve you. And I get it, right? That form is not charity, it's not an NGO, sure. But there's a way for you to get the information you need and make it painless to your customer, right? Because at the end of the day, you need data. I'm going to chime in on Grab because I think appreciating super apps in the Philippines is a little hard. Because even in the Philippines, I don't think Grab is as much of a super app as it is anywhere else. No, like I mean, if you travel, let's say
Yeah.
you go to Singapore, Grab is for ride sharing, Grab taxi, Grab pay, Grab food, Grab scooter, right?
We,
Among other things.
that is the super of all super apps, but yeah.
Right. So they do a terrific job. And when you're there, like the first time I used it, I did not get lost at all. Right. Like it was super intuitive for me to use. And so I agree. That's terrific. That's terrific UX. That's terrific UI. Uh uh on the so I'll keep on the flip side, right? Like on the too late. I remember sitting into one of your talks and you gave the example of eBay, right? Is that a too late story? And can you tell people about the story about eBay? Because most of
Yeah.
the people that are listening to us will not be aware of it.
Many, many moons ago, eBay was Amazon. It was the
Mhm.
leading e-commerce marketplace. And at some point or another, they decided that they needed a facelift. So they changed their background color on their homepage from
Mhm.
yellow to white, or white to yellow, one of those things. But it used to be yellow and then they made it white.
Yeah, it was yellow. They made it white.
And they made it white. And immediately, half of their user base dropped off because they were so irritated at this facelift. And what ended up happening was a little known player called Amazon started catching the windfall of these eBay uh, defectors. And that's the Amazon story. eBay panicked and within a day or two shifted it back to the original yellow background and then
Mhm.
had a plan to gradually shift the color to white over time so that people
Right.
wouldn't notice. But by then it was too late. So the reason I love this story is you have to ask yourself why you're making the changes in the first place.
Mhm.
Did anybody complain about the yellow background? Is it making it difficult to use? Are you losing customers because they don't like the color yellow? If the answers to any of those questions are yes, then by all means change the color. But if there's nothing wrong with it, you don't have to always fix it so you appear
Right.
shiny and new. You know, the
Right.
temptation to always look innovative and tech, tech trend setting and all of these things is so strong that we forget we don't need that. We don't need that. We are
Right.
fine. We are perfectly fine with what we have. And so the changes should always be fueled by any feedback that you get from your customers and the level of feedback that you're getting from them. Is it going to make or break? And if it will make or break, make sure you advise them beforehand that the change is going to occur. Imagine if eBay had just sent a quick message to all of their account holders. Hi guys, just letting you know, in a few weeks, we're going to be upgrading some stuff, listing down what we're upgrading. They're not going to get so jarred when they log into eBay one day and it looks completely different, so
Mhm.
managing expectations, making sure that your decisions are truly based on user needs and expectations and not just trying to catch up with what's trendy. And I guess the third reason why I like the eBay example very much is it reminds us to not rest on our laurels. You might be big today, but
Mhm.
any small player, and that's why UX is awesome. UX
Right.
the
Right.
competition space. A small player with better UX than you can overtake like that
Right.
in so you really have to be on your
Yeah.
toes.
In this age, that's true. I remember the story of Sergey Brin and Larry Page selling the Google algorithm to Yahoo, right, for a
Yeah,
measly 2 to 3 million, and they got turned down, right? And before you know it, like 2 years later, Google is the king of search. So it's insane. I've got a question on behalf of all of the business owners that we're having this conversation with today. Uh, so take for example, for the brand owners that are with us, or the decision makers or the managers, how do they make a critical decision in deciding, do I need a designer in my team or do I need a UX UI engineer, a UX UI specialist? Like, what's a great way for them to figure out, okay, this is what I need in my team, not that, or that's the only thing I need in my team right now and not that.
that's an interesting question because we have a lot of clients like that. So the
Mhm.
simple answer is how often will you need UX work done in your
Mhm.
business, right? So obviously, if you're somebody like Lazada, it makes more sense for you to have an internal UX UI team because
Right.
your entire business is dependent on that experience for your customers on your website and on your app. So because
Mhm.
you need the work done on a constant basis, it might make more sense to have an internal team. But if your industry is one that doesn't really require UX on a constant, regular basis, then you might want to outsource. That makes more
Mhm.
business sense because you'll just be wasting money keeping these people on board, and they're kind of idle for a few weeks and months and
Right.
even.
Right. And
And yeah,
it'll create bad habits, right? You have somebody idle, you will
yeah.
create bad habits in your office environment. Yeah.
I'll say though, because we have a lot of clients that have internal UX and UI teams, they have a full complement of designers and even developers, and we are still actually helping them
Hmm.
because one of the things they realize is forest for the trees happens a lot.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's very,
Yeah.
very hard for you to suddenly start seeing what might be wrong with your product because how do you tell a person that their baby is ugly?
Right.
Eventually, they come to be very personally and emotionally invested in their own products, and they just need a third party to balance out that review and balance out the decisions that they're making for the designs and the users. Yeah.
Right. And I think like we probably appreciate that, like in the office ourselves, where we've got people whose job titles, they're not consultants, but their job title is consultant because their job is to not be attached to any one project. Their job is to audit all of the projects. Because I always tell our guys, the worst person to judge the performance of the marketing campaign is the marketer that is
Person
involved in that campaign.
exactly. And the worst person
Yeah.
to judge the design is the designer, with all due respect.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. So
exactly.
since we're jumping into marketing, I'll pivot us over to the market, right? So let's talk about the market. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of businesses pivoted to digital. No choice, right? Like I think for a lot of businesses, they really didn't have any choice because that's where the customers were. It pushed a lot of businesses to seriously start looking into or actually make a leap into UX UI, in my opinion. And then I assess enough websites in a week to know that there aren't enough businesses that are actually making the investment, right? So everybody says they want it, but nobody really wants to throw the resources necessary at it. What have you found has been the biggest roadblock to businesses and brands taking their UX UI seriously?
I think it's just not understanding what UX is.
Mhm.
Many people still think UX is just designing a website. And
Mhm.
when you think about that, it's very easy for you to assume, oh, okay, websites are not that hard. You know,
Right.
you there, and then you put a picture here and then a button, and you mistakenly assume that because it looks simple when you're using
Mhm.
it, it's actually simple to make. And the beautiful part about UX, which is also why people don't understand to invest in it, is good UX is invisible. So there's a lot of
Right.
stuff in the back that you don't see. And that's why it appears simple to somebody who's engaging with the website from that side. But it's got a lot of parts, it's got a lot of processes and methodologies, a lot of thinking and strategy. And if they don't understand that, it becomes very difficult for them to invest or even to defend the investment to internal
Mhm.
stakeholders, because the internal
Right.
stakeholders as well do not understand. Sorry, I'm paying that much money for a person to build me a website. Like, I don't understand.
Right.
I think the second reason why people talk a lot about UX, but they don't actually invest in it, is because they feel they have to talk about it. It's kind of
Mm.
like back in the day when you would talk about books that you didn't actually read, but you felt, no, but you felt you had to, because everybody seems to know about Kafka, and but you never actually, and it just becomes something you're supposed to talk about, but
Mhm.
not something you've actually read about and know about. And so when it
Mhm.
actually comes to putting skin in the game, you freeze because you don't
Right.
know much about it. Yeah.
So how much skin in the game should people put into their UX UI? Like, does pricing ever become a roadblock? Is sticker shock an issue for most brands that you encounter?
I think it is, especially if we connect it to what I just said, that they don't understand all of the moving parts. And
Right.
definitely. But I would say the best way to look at investing in UX is not as an expense, but
Mhm.
as an investment. And you look at the returns that you're going to get. You look at, okay, if I fix the website this way, I will get these many customers. I will get these many return transactions. I will get a lot of new customers that I probably wouldn't have gotten using,
Mhm.
traditional offline methods. But the other way to look at it is opportunity loss. What
Mhm.
if you don't invest in UX? You might lose customers. You
Right.
might already be losing customers, and that's really why UX becomes integral, because as I mentioned, it builds those relationships and it strengthens those relationships, and then eventually it becomes such second nature to your customers. They're not thinking about going anywhere else. It's almost like muscle
Mhm.
memory, and
Right.
that's where I think it should go. Yeah.
Somebody actually threw in a question, and I think it's very appropriate in the section of the conversation that we're having, right? And it's about balancing the need of the business and the need of the customer, like for UX. because I think when you champion it, and it is sort of like the topic, right? You're not the customer championing the user's experience. But I guess the business is saying, so do I bend over to everything that makes the customer's life easy? Like, let's say, at the risk of getting not very qualified leads, at the risk of getting, okay, people that start carts but never really check them out, right? How do you balance the need of the end user and the business?
So that's actually something that I wanted to talk about. So it's a great question, and I'm so glad somebody brought it up. There is a misconception that because it's called user experience, we don't consider anything else or anybody else except the
Right.
user. And actually, user experience is meant to balance the user needs and the business goals. That's actually
Mhm.
the job. So how we do it is there's many ways. We start thinking of which things are really, really required by the business
Mhm.
and which things are nice to have. Or do we need to ask for this information now, or could we get it later? Do we need
Mhm.
to ask for the information in this exact way? Could we do it another way? So gamification, for example, is one of the ways we still get information and we still
Mhm.
get participation and engagement without the customer feeling like they're working for it.
Right.
Other ways we balance is we start asking the client also, maybe this is not the customer you want to target. Because if you're so adamant about targeting this customer and we're hitting friction in terms of what you're willing to provide them and what they actually expect, you might want to reconsider targeting another group that would be
Right.
with that friction. And that's okay. That's okay.
Right.
It's happened several times that you have a product that was intended for one set of users, but it actually ends up for another set. And you still
Mhm.
get your user base and they're more engaged and they're more loyal and it works out for everybody. So I think that's one way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question to that, right? Because doing the UX UI, and this is also from the people that are joining us in the audience, and the follow-up question is, I think the direction for UX UI really comes in because you spoke about data and you spoke about research. But when do you begin to suspect that your initial premise is wrong, or the research was wrong, which means you won't get to the desired end result for UX UI anyway? When do you begin to suspect that? And how do you prevent making the error that your initial hypothesis, your initial premise for your UX UI is wrong?
So when they're doing something completely opposite from what you expected them to do. So let's say you designed an experience, right? They'll land on the homepage and then they'll click this button and then they'll fill up the form. And that's what we call the
Right,
happy, right? That's your
right.
entire journey. But you're seeing that they land on the homepage, they meander for a bit, they click the banner, and then they go to this other page, and then they're in the FAQs. Then you're like, okay, evidently we didn't design it in the way that users expect to use it, or we designed it in a way that's not guiding the users properly.
Mhm.
So something went awry in the research, because if the research was concrete enough, then when the users get there, it would be intuitive, and because it would resonate with them, and they'd go, oh, cool, I see the
Right.
button. I'll press the button, fill up the form, etc. So that's usually where we notice, aha, because we ask, what is the intended behavior? We ask the clients, or what's the intended flow here, like the happy path, and then we watch. And if users are doing that predominantly, then kudos. But
Mhm.
if they're going somewhere else, or doing something else, or worse, stopping because they're not entirely sure what they're supposed to be doing,
Right, right.
something went awry.
And so let's talk about the timing for UX UI in a business, right? Like, so take for example, what we're finding, like especially me, the last quarter tends to be super busy, right? Because you're wrapping up the year, you're assessing the previous year, but aside from that, you're also, this is the point in time, the last quarter of the year is where you actually shake all the hands you can for your 2022, right? And not a lot of people, I think most of the people that are with us understand that, they're either in the middle of or have done their strat plan, they've done their budget allocations, and so it leads to a lot of conversations for Truelogic. In this case, so for the brands that are doing their strat, when is the right time for a brand to start seriously considering UX UI as part of their investment? The part two to this question is, what kind of line item should it be in their budgets, right? But let's start with, like, when should you wait for a data point that tells you your customers are in pain or have a tremendous amount of friction, or do you not need to wait to react to that, and just consider it and just jump into the investment anyway. So when's the right time for them to start seriously considering it?
So I think it's more about when your customers start shifting to a touch point that requires UX, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your customers are still predominantly offline or predominantly using a telephone to transact with you, right? They still
Mm-hmm.
prefer the calls. Maybe you don't always need to invest in UX at that point. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing that inflection, that shift to using your app or using your website or looking for an app or a website that you currently do not have, when they start moving to those touch points, those touch points that require UX, definitely consider that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really, there is, just like there's no too late for UX, there's no
Mm-hmm.
early for UX. It really,
Mm-hmm.
really isn't. Sometimes we've had clients where it was a 2-year roadmap before they even got any product out. And we were there with them to help strategize, build out the user personas and what good could look like for an entire 2 years before the product even hit the market. So there's
Right.
never too early for UX.
And
Yeah.
I think that's the advantage, right? The fact that you were a marketer first before you were a UX/UI professional, because you will actually understand, okay, what is your brand archetype and what do your customer avatars look like and where do they hang out and what content do they consume and what brands do they follow and so on and so forth. To, to make it a bit more tactical though, for let's say decision makers that are listening to this conversation, are there specific metrics that can tell you need to invest in this soon, or is there a separate metric that tells you need to invest in this now, or even worse, right? Is there a metric that says, yeah, it would have been useful to have this yesterday?
Yeah, I think the one metric is your customers. If they're still with you, but they're getting slower or their
Mhm.
transactions are getting farther and few between,
Mhm.
maybe it's time to look at it soon. But if they're all leaving, uh, you should have done it yesterday.
Right. So
Yesterday.
transaction frequency and customer churn are good metrics to look at.
Absolutely. So anything to do with how your customer relates to your business and those changes with that relationship that they have with your business, those are the metrics. Those are the indicators for when UX is absolutely necessary. The customer should be the barometer for UX anyway.
Mhm.
So you can use those data points to fuel the decisions as to when to bring in UX, how much of it to invest in. Again, thinking of it in terms of an investment and not an expense. Uh,
Mhm.
and if I were to I've never actually had to answer this question. This is cool. Like if I had to nominate what line item it would be under, I guess it would be whatever line item in your P&L is there for relationship building or
Mhm.
acquisition. Um, One might argue that UX is the new CRM because it helps build one-to-one relationships,
Right.
but across so many customers at the same time. Yeah.
Right. I think the other way to review it is, what are your opportunity losses? Because the math is fairly straightforward, right? What are your opportunity losses in terms of the customer churn that you've had, right? If historically you knew that the average customer, like let's take Starbucks, for example, right? Because they're great when it comes to their customer retention. They know that the average Starbucks customer will visit them 12 to 17 times a month, will spend an average of $3 to $4 on every transaction, and that they will be loyal for, I think the number was about 2 years thereabouts, right? But if they realize, look at our average customer numbers, the transaction frequency has decreased from 12, which was our old base, and now they're only coming to us 6 times, right? Even worse yet, your customer that used to transact with you 12 times a month and stayed loyal for 2 years is now only loyal for 6 months, right? What is the value of the lost transaction and the lost lifetime value? And if you do the math, you'll realize, okay, by removing friction, by making life easier for them, you sort of make it back by saving yourself from the opportunity losses that you would have incurred had you not paid attention to it.
Because the
So,
data tells you what is going on, either what's
mhm,
going right and what's going wrong, but it doesn't tell you why. And so investing in customer experience or user experience usually gives you those insights as to why that is happening. And once you
mhm,
understand why, it becomes very easy to come up with a solution to prevent that or to address it. And I think that's what people need to understand about data. Data can be very, very helpful in fueling customer centric innovation, but do not look at data as just an indicator for when or what.
mhm,
to fuel the conversations as to why this is happening. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned earlier that with some of the brands and the companies that you work with, they actually have captive design teams and captive UX UI teams, right? But let's take the more typical business and the more typical brand, right? The chances are they don't really have a UX UI specialist, engineer, designer that's captive to the team. And they're probably having at it with their own design team. Uh, is it good practice for a business to attempt to begin their baby steps at UX/UI with their current internal captive team and then progress to look for a provider later down the road? Or should they begin with provider so that at least they know what good practice is like and then they know how to hire the people that know those good practices?
So the answer to that question will take us back to the beginning of this whole.
Mm-hmm.
Does your internal team have empathy? If they have empathy and they are able to put themselves out of the equation, take themselves out of the equation on behalf of creating great experiences for the users, then by all means start with your internal team. A good acid test that I always do is ask them to design something, a homepage of a website, and then come back to them and just pretend. You don't even have to actually do it, but if you want to actually do it, go ahead. But come back
Mm-hmm.
to them and say, so we showed your design to some users and they don't quite understand this part and they don't quite understand that part and they don't know what to do with this. You know, you give them the feedback for improvement and gauge the reaction of this person. If the person is like, huh, that's so stupid, the button's right there, how can they not know what to do?
Right.
Maybe not built for user experience.
Right.
It's more like, oh my gosh, really? Gosh, you're right. I didn't see that. Like, what can we do? Like, should I move the button here? Like, do they have like a preference for the color of this thing to make it easier to see? Then that person is built for UX. Yeah. And you can
Right.
turn out
That-
the.
yeah, no, I think that's a great behavior way to answer that, right? Because at least it's something you can observe and it's not some lofty principle virtue, something that because it's almost like hire a good person. Like, okay, but what is a good person, and
Yes,
what is a good UX UI, right?
yes.
Uh, what about the current demand for the market for UX UI? The buzz is a surplus, but the current demand in the market, how are you encountering it?
We're very small. We are lucky. So the UX pond is a very small pond, but
Mhm.
we are very lucky in that we've built long-standing relationships with our clients.
Mhm.
I think what I like about our market is there's so much headroom for growth because as we are shifting to more digital engagements, you might start with UXing a website and then, or a progressive web app, and then a mobile app. And then who's going to say you might want to UX your internal systems for your employees? Because let's not forget, employees are customers too. They're the internal customers. And,
Mhm.
I feel that our market is growing with our customers as well. And the more they understand the needs and the benefits of UX, the bigger the pie gets. And
Right.
yeah.
I also think it is something that will hit critical mass, right? Like take for example, actually Denise, I wanted to just quickly touch base on this conversation because for me it's been a personal curiosity, like the ethics in design, right? Like the ethics in design. When do you maximize? When do you maximize for maximum retention, maximum attention of the audience of your client, like the audience of the brand? uh, and when is it okay to not necessarily maximize that attention, right? Like take for example, when I work with my clients, I will have clients that say, okay, yay, I'm glad that they're not spending less than a minute on the site. I'm glad now they're up to 2 minutes. What can we do to make that five, right? And to me, the first question is always, what are you going to make them do in 5 minutes, right? What's there to do in 5 minutes? uh, and if I don't get a straightforward answer, like meaning if you don't know what kind of value you want to create in those 5 minutes, because I think that's a valid concern, right? I would like my users to stay there for 5 minutes, but how do you make good use of their time, right? Other than you wanting to be top of mind for 5 minutes versus 2 minutes.
And
Where do you stand on that?
yeah, this is where that balance between business objectives and user needs really comes into.
Mm-hmm.
So I would actually start first with why all of a sudden do you want them to stay 5 minutes versus 2 minutes? And I'd like a very good answer. It can't just be because I want them to spend more time with me. I mean,
Needy.
clingy client. One could argue actually that the faster they transact with you, the more they love you.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Such a fast pace, and we have so many things on our to-do lists every day. And if you could get me done with you in 1 minute, I'm gonna love you even more. And these are the
Right.
conversations I have with clients. Maybe you're looking at time as a metric the wrong way, where the longer the time is not actually what will make them love you. It's the faster
Right.
time. Things like this, no?
Right.
I go into that conversation with, okay, if I get a strong enough business objective for this ask, then we have to ask ourselves, what can we give the customers then that they will want to spend
Mhm.
more time with you? Yeah.
Okay. We've got lightning round quick opinion pieces here, right? Like so first lightning round quick opinion piece. I have a couple of UXUI pet peeves, right? I'll name my top two. I actually have more than top two, but I'll name my top two. Um, for me, the first one is the immediate unsolicited interstitial, like what most people will call a pop-up, right? The technical term for it is an interstitial. In my opinion, it's bad for user experience. It's bad for SEO. I've never really seen the point in interrupting the user. Again, right? I'm glad that your marketing team thinks it's a great idea, but you're not the customer. The other thing that I think people are treating badly, like specific to the Philippine context, is how they're managing the compliance to the Data Privacy Act, right? Because it's also an interruption, right? Like it's a takeover or it's a big banner at the bottom. Like why? Like to me, it looks like it's 20% of it. 20% of brands are not doing it, or 20% of websites are not doing it in the Philippines. 70% are doing it wrong, and there's that rare 10% that's actually doing it right. Like for
Clients,
websites. Mhm.
clients saying, okay, as long as we put it there, we're compliant, and
Right.
not enough effort and thought is put into, but we know it doesn't really work. Kind of like CAPTCHA. How many of
Mhm.
us love CAPTCHA? We know why it's there. We know why it needs to exist. Everybody hates it.
Right.
Everybody hated it when you couldn't read the letters because they were skewed weird.
Mhm.
Everybody hated the pick a picture, like all the stoplights or all the traffic. We hate
Right. Right.
also, where is the challenge to things like that? And side note, Capture is actually working on something where it's going to be invisible. You don't have to
Mhm.
type in letters and you don't have to select the photos. Just watch this space. But there we go. It's the same. I challenge not just designers, but anybody who understands frustration.
Mhm.
To throw their ideas in a hat, and you never know what we might come up with.
Right.
UX is a collaborative process. You don't have to leave it to the UX people to think of the ideas. And by the way, that's some of the fun times I have with my clients.
Mhm.
When they participate. And sometimes some of the best ideas can come from the corner of the room guy who was quiet for 3 months, and he says something, and we're all like, there it is. That's the design solution right there.
Right, right. Like because serendipity can happen. I'm a believer of serendipity. What are your let's say top three UX UI pet peeves? Like something that you see usually gets done and you don't understand why is that still getting done that way?
Yes. Okay. I think the top, like the number one that always happens is confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you that don't know, confirmation bias is a bias, and everybody has biases. The human condition, the human brain, psychologically, we all
Right,
have biases. But confirmation bias is when you're trying to hear, you want to hear only one thing. You want to hear a validation for your ideas. So we're here working on a design or testing your product, and you're like, ha, see, they understand to push that button. It's like, and you don't hear anything else. And then when you don't hear what you like to hear, you get upset. So it's
mm-hmm.
very, very difficult for us to counter confirmation bias because you're waiting to hear that what you decided on is correct. And that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely one of my pet peeves. The minute you test your product, the minute we put it in the hands of the users, nothing you did is correct until they tell us it is. That's the only
Right.
confirmation. I think the second pet peeve would be design by committee.
Right. Democratizing design.
I like collaborating with clients, but just like too many cooks spoil the broth. sometimes leave certain expertise to the experts.
Right.
People always say, we do not know your business. You know the business better than us. So likewise, sometimes there are things that we know, or that a designer knows, or that a developer knows, and try not to kind of design by committee, because then the decisions take forever. Sometimes they're not the right decisions. And usually the loudest or most powerful person in the room makes the decision. So design by
Mm-hmm.
committee is a second pet peeve, which brings me to my third. There is a difference between responsibility and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Very often we will mix the two. You might be accountable for the success of a project or the success of this build. Let's say you are the product owner for this e-commerce website and you are accountable for that. It doesn't mean you are responsible for all the nitty-gritty details that go in there.
Mm-hmm.
And this especially happens the higher up in an organization you go. The boss should be accountable for everything that's happening, but they should relinquish responsibility and empower and deputize people to do that responsibility. Because otherwise what ends up happening is one person is making decisions without full visibility on what's been happening and the little nitty-gritty details, and you start muddling what true accountability is versus responsibility. And the same goes as well for who's accountable for this part of the experience. Is it the client
Mm-hmm.
or the customer? Just
Mm-hmm.
because you are having a website built doesn't mean you are accountable for everything the customer experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Answers a survey this way or decides to, spam a button, you are not accountable for what happens after that. And
Right.
very, very, important. And that's a peeve of mine when they can't distinguish between accountability and the responsibility. And I
Right.
guess that's it. Yeah.
Lazada and Shopee's UXUI. What's your verdict on them?
It works for their users. It's not always the prettiest things, guys, and it looks really cluttered and messy. And for many of us, it can be quite overwhelming. But the proof is in the pudding. They have 2 million users a month. They have
Right.
checkouts. So say what you will about what it looks like and behaves like, it evidently works for the users. It's designed for them. So
I agree.
answer I will give you, it obviously works because people are
Right.
using it all the time.
I- in 2020, the 2021 reports are actually coming out, but in the 2020 reports, the data from Facebook, from Google, from Bain and Company, from We Are Social, like a lot of I think social monitoring data providers estimate that the number of Filipinos that did their first online transaction in 2020 was 19 million. That's insane, right? And a lot of that was powered by Lazada, powered by Shopee. So to me, I absolutely agree, right? The behavior speaks for itself. The users transacted for the first time, they were able to buy something. What more do you want? So that's great. I got another lightning round question. Uh, brands with what are some brands with UX UI that would make a Denise hack proud? So we mentioned Grab earlier.
Yeah. I have a cheat sheet. Let me check. I had
You
a cheat
mentioned Teco. Yeah, you mentioned
Yes,
Teco, right?
definitely. As I said, Lazada and Shopee. I think, yeah, Gcash, for example,
Mm.
Gcash has also had a phenomenal uptake in customer use. Um, and, I hope Paymaya can catch up soon because sayang, they offer the same thing eh. But you see the difference? They're offering essentially the same thing, but for some reason Gcash was, I guess, easier to adopt, easier to understand, or
Mm-hmm.
intuitive, no? Um, the BDO chatbot was quite intuitive to me, the way the chatbot for BDO worked.
Mm-hmm.
Had the right hierarchy, had the right and progressive disclosure of questions and information. It knew when to present it as a question versus as options for selection. Very, very intuitive, very, very easy to learn and use. Um, and actually, the BPI app, it got revamped I think, a year
Mm-hmm.
or 2 years ago, and I was really impressed. I was really impressed. Still, some things I'd like to work there if I could, give some advice, like be careful about the terminologies and the jargon that you use. But I think those apps are pretty,
Right,
well.
right. My top three favorites, I think and they've been long-standing my favorites for a while now, is Fitbit, both the device and the app, right? Because the device is a user interface, and the app. a great example of an app that isn't trying to keep your attention, right? You just want to take a look at your stats for the day. You want to take a look at, did you hit your exercise target? And then that's it. Like, it keeps you there for 30 seconds, a minute, and then you're gone. So the app and the device, the designs are terrific. It used to be better, in my opinion, before Google acquired them, because it was real time. Now it's sort of, now the data sort of buffers. Skyscanner's UXUI is fairly easy for me. It's the easiest for me. It's the easiest way to book rather than booking with an airline itself. Um, and ultimately, my favorite, Uber. Right, Uber was my favorite when they were still in the Philippines.
Burns. I wanted Filipino. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're very Western in your ano.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
but I agree with the BPI app, like in terms of how easy it is to use now, right? There are still some things to improve on it. Like, I remember enrolling my first few bills, and I still had trouble with it. Like, take for example, Manila Water has like 5 listings on it, and that kind of that kind of friction. Eventually, it gets figured out, but I would love to be able to navigate an app or an environment without having to Google what the right way to do it is,
Yes,
right? That's the
exactly.
ultimate test.
Yeah. I think
Uh,
actually one of the things that we notice, like anytime you have to reference Google or your seatmate or your younger family member, something is
mm,
wrong with the app experience for sure. Definitely, definitely. And I guess, you know, when you're so focused on getting them from task A to task B in an app, but you're not actually asking yourself if that's a task they want to do, uh, forcing them is
right.
another thing I would definitely keep a watch out for. Yeah.
So I got a question. I got a question. This one actually got thrown to me on Viber before we actually started the conversation. Because when I posted it, people were saying, "Hey, I'm going. Hey, I'm going." I'm thinking like terrific, right? But they threw me this question. They're going like, most common design sins that you see people commit, like on websites, on apps. Well, let's say top three. What are the top three most common bad UI, bad design elements that people tend to insist on their website?
Mandatory fields.
Mm-hmm.
Mandatory stuff. What's mandatory for you might not really be. And my favorite answer is always, sorry, may I ask why you actually need to ask this question or have them fill up this field? Because for marketing. Then this is not a marketing tool, guys. This is a transaction tool or a utility
Mm-hmm.
tool or so please keep the marketing research tools and only ask what needs to be asked. So
Mm-hmm.
mandatory fields that don't have to be mandatory, or you don't tell them pa it's optional.
Right.
Really bad design, guys. Another one would be not being inclusive and diverse in your
Mm-hmm.
design. Can we please move away from just asking if the gender is male or female? In the time we live in today, guys, we really, really need to be uh, considerate of other people's preferences, and be
Mm-hmm.
more diverse and inclusive. So a simple addition, you ask male, female, prefer not to say will make a world of difference to a lot of your users. So definitely
Mm-hmm.
this inclusive and diverse mindset. Even when it comes to things like age, ethnicity, just try to be a little bit more inclusive and balanced. And I guess the third thing that I would definitely say is not being aware that there are two kinds of behaviors: the
Mm-hmm.
transactionary behavior and the point and shoot behavior. So transactionary is I'll go through the motions, I'll explore the site or the pages,
Mm-hmm.
get to know stuff, push some buttons here and there. But then there's I know what I want to do, and then there's no search bar. So
Right.
please allow them to search, and please make sure your search logic is top notch, please. So if they already know what they want to do in your site, they don't have to go through 10,000 pages, what I like to call the IKEA journey of
Right.
web. It's just
Oh
one.
no, yeah, that's a good analogy.
We have to go to all of these things before I get there. you know,
Right.
don't IKEA them on your websites and apps, please.
Okay. The this actually leads me to the next question that I got, right? But this one's a little long, so I'll break their question apart, because they were actually saying, uh, is essential design element, like, what would make the following good design. So the first one was what makes a good navigation or menu on a website. So that's one. The other is what makes for a good contact form. What's an essential element of a good shopping cart? What's a good essential element of a product page? And then what's a good essential element of a search function? Like, so that was the question that I got. So
Okay.
it's a mouthful. Let's take them one at a time.
So that's okay. So you know how you're supposed to check first what your users are expecting to see.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make that the default. But there are what we call universal like standards, things you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to have, right? So when you're looking at a menu or a navigation bar, try not to make it more than 6 to 7 options. The minute you start going double digits in your navigation or you have a long menu drop down, it gets very intimidating and it's tedious and it takes them longer to make a decision because there's so many more
Mm-hmm.
options in front. But if you have a lot of menu items, try grouping them together and chunking them
Mm-hmm.
together. So on the onset, you only see four, but actually there's six, and one of them actually has a drop down for two additional
Mm-hmm.
things. So you can do that. Definitely search. Please place your search bar in the right place. I've seen search bar placements that are quite frankly, I'm surprised they still get placed in odd areas, like in the middle of the page, slightly
Right.
skewed.
I've seen that.
You know, please, everybody knows to look for the search bar at the top of the page. Please leave it there. Make sure that your search is clear if it's global, meaning it's going to scan the entire website, or if it's local, it's only a search for this particular section or page. Clue in
Mm-hmm.
your users for that. What were the other questions? So menu, navigation, search.
Contact form.
Yeah. And I guess this is also somewhat of a pet peeve. Pick one, email or mobile. Just pick one. Because,
Right.
and honestly, if you want to go a step further, have them choose. Contact me via email or contact me via mobile, and then just
Mm-hmm.
ask for one. Because you know it's just overzealous trying to collect so many ways to
Right.
contact them,
The,
right?
the
So
last two was shopping cart and product page. Let's do product page and then shopping cart because in a sequence, that's normally how they go anyway. A good design element, a must have in a product page.
that is trickier because it depends on the industry. A product
Mm-hmm.
page for a real estate website, for example, versus a food website versus a car website, the
Right.
product is really going to be different in what's essential. But if I had to, off the cuff, definitely photos. People make decisions on photos
Mm-hmm.
and pricing. Don't make them
Mm-hmm.
up for the price, guys. People want to know how much it is, and don't try to hide it because you're like, let's just tell them when they ask. These price available upon request is only reserved for very, very elite luxury brands, and even that can be very tedious. I've seen it
Mm-hmm.
happen. Tell them how much it is, even if you
Right.
they won't add it. The cart, that's their right to know.
Yeah. Hermes, come on, does not hide the price tag, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Let them know. And if we're talking about getting the right leads and making sure your qualified customers are coming in, price point is one way to do that. So just
Right. The last one is shopping cart. Like, what is an essential element what is a good design element or an essential element to a good shopping cart?
um, the cart itself, no, not just checking out, the cart itself. I really like it when you click the cart and it has a drop down first with all of the things in your cart without leaving the page
Mm-hmm.
that you're on, right? Because many, even Lazada does this, right? Like you'll click the cart and it takes you to the cart already. Sometimes you just want a quick reference because I'm shopping
Mm-hmm.
now and what's in my cart again? So just a quick listing of a product, the price and the quantity so that they can reference it is something that
Right.
done more often because I've seen when we've tested e-commerce experiences that the cart is in the real world. In the real world, when you're shopping, you can see your cart while you're shopping, while you're in the grocery
Right.
store, exactly what's in there. But in the digital space, you don't, and it's immense cognitive load. I have to remember what I added, right? And sometimes you just want to
Right.
go for it. So let them, you know, when they click it once, it has a drop down. They click it another time, it takes them to the page. Or if they hover
Right.
on this, you know,
Right.
mimic.
There's another question. So somebody's saying that they are currently always adding. They're in the stage where they're always adding new features and new utility to the website. Is it best to invest in UX/UI once they're done? Once they're done implementing all the features and all the new utilities to the website, or should they be involving UX/UI now as they're adding the utility and the features to the site?
Now sana. Because as mentioned, the earlier we can spot the potential issues, the better, no? Kasi if
Mm-hmm.
you call us later, tapos we tell you what went, you'll have to revise stuff. But for those of you that, we've had clients na gawa na yung product, na launch na yung website. They had no choice. That was really the mandate. And only after they launch it can they involve us. That's okay too. But if you have a choice, the earlier the better. It's
Right.
really.
I have two price related questions that are coming in. So the one is the first one is the cost of is the cost of a UX/UI project based on the number of pages or based on the number of functions in a website or an app?
Functions. Because
Okay.
have a page that has very complicated functions like nutrition calculator can be put in one page, so but also a login can be put in one page, so we do it by function. By
Right. So because I think it answers the second question, right? The second question was, let's say I only had one function, but I have 400 pages. Do the 400 pages impact the pricing of my UX/UI project?
no, because they're templated. So if the page is templated, pareho lang yun.
Right.
For example, if you have an e-commerce or any website with products, each of those products has a page. We don't charge you per page. We charge you for
Right.
the design of a product page, and then you can have hundreds and hundreds of products, of course, but we don't charge you for that. Uh,
Right.
Design, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The other question that we got was, what would be a ballpark figure to set aside as a budget for a UX/UI engagement?
Okay, there is none, unfortunately, because it really depends on how much work needs to get done, how much work has already been done, what your goals are, who your users are, etc. So unfortunately, there isn't any. But if you would like to learn more, you can actually send us a message at Qairos.asia. So just go to the website Qairos, QAIROS.asia, and we'd be happy to put together a proposal for you so you can see. I've tried doing this, giving a ballpark, and it's burned me in the past because either I overestimate or underestimate, and it's never fair to each client.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's about the all the time that we have left. We managed to get through, I think, most of the questions. I'm just checking if we had any more because I don't want to ignore uh,
Yeah.
any of the. I don't want to ignore any of the questions. But we did sort of run 11 minutes like overtime. We got about 20 25 minutes in for the questions. But I think we managed to hit them all. If I miss your questions, like I'm super sorry, but we'll get back to it. I'm sure, Denise, this will not be the last time we ask you to join us.
For having me.
But
This is nice. Yeah.
no, it was terrific. Like I think this is a great wrap up to 12 episodes so far of Truelogic DX. And I think like I mentioned at the start, right? One of the things that is on my wish list for the next for the next few sessions would be to continue some of the conversations because again, there's so much more to talk about, right? We didn't talk about data or digital storytelling or analytics. And so there are more things to talk about. So, but having that said, I did want to say, from me and on behalf of everybody that's participating here and the Truelogic team, super thank you very much for joining us. For everybody that joined us in the convo, thank you very much for joining us. It's our last episode for the year. We will
Merry
join you guys again in 2022. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, guys. Advance
Christmas.
happy holidays.